If you ask them, they will say that they love me. I love them, but what I am does not exist in their world. So that's the heaviest one.
Hey, good morning. Okay, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Robin. I am how shall I describe? Um, I'm an artist living in Brooklyn. Pronouns they, them.
Cool. You want to say how old you are? You don't have to.
I'm sorry?
You want to say how old you are? You don't have to.
Oh, I'm 27.
Cool, legit. Okay, I think we're this. Yeah, we're the same. We're the exact same age. Wow. Okay. All right. Cool. So, Robin, could you describe to me the community you grew up in?
Hmm. I grew up in a small town that was mostly a college town. Um, and it was in the South and it was in an agricultural area. So I grew up in a semi-developed rural area, which was not yet suburban, um, but had elements of both. Nobody lives here, and yeah, my neighbor from 15 years knows exactly who I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, Predominantly Christian. Yeah, whether or not people observed, they were assumed to be Christian.
Okay. Okay. So, was there a lot of sort of variation in how observant people were?
For sure. Um, there's the amount, the statistical collective amount of how much people observe who say they are Christian probably applied pretty directly to the area where I grew up. So there will be whatever percentage of people who, yeah, totally go to church, put on their best suit every 3 days, Wednesdays and Sundays, and they're involved in the whatevers. And then there's people who, go for Easter, maybe go for Christmas, and then pray a lot.
Okay.
Different practices, different beliefs.
Okay. Okay. How would you say your family would have described itself?
Um, Very observant, Protestant Christian, um, very theologically engaged, which is not necessarily the case for families in the area where I grew up. Um, a lot of the things that set me apart from my peers were things like we don't observe Halloween because it is a secular holiday
Pagan.
now. And even before it was a secular holiday, it was a pagan holiday. And we
Right.
don't groove with that. Witches are real. Stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. If
Um,
you
but how would they describe themselves? As Protestant Christian, observant.
okay. Okay. Was there any kind of friction between you and less religious people as a result of that? That your family didn't do certain things or did do certain things, even though everybody was predominantly Christian?
A bit. Most of the friction there would have been was probably mostly felt by me and my family members rather than um, having any kind of consequence. Well, the consequence was that I wasn't so close with my peers because I don't know what Halloween is. And when I was in preschool, I was told that there is this social myth of Santa Claus and of the Easter Bunny, and I should not ruin that for my peers, but also it's not real.
Interesting. Okay, so on the one hand, your family was Christian
Yes.
and relative to the local area, religious. But on the
Yes.
other hand, there was a kind of skepticism already because you were being encouraged not to believe in a lot of fictitious figures, essentially, that a lot of people sort of, it starts out as a childhood thing, and then at some point as an adult or as a teenager or as a preteen, whenever it is, most people, I think, agree that these are not genuine figures, these are mythological figures. But you were
Right.
being encouraged from a very young age to be like, this isn't real.
Yeah, I was given a kid level book on the history of Saint Nicholas when I was, I don't know, like 5.
Hmm.
Um, that I thought was really cool because it was still a fictionalized telling of uh, the figure of Saint Nicholas. Um, but it was a really nice little story, and there's a guy who does some cool things in there, and there's a little bit of like class justice, and it had a beautiful green cover. Yeah, I liked that book a lot. But
Okay.
that's interesting that you bring that up. It's like, oh yeah, I was being encouraged in questioning
Yeah,
mythological figures from a
it's
young
an
age.
interesting one because the community that I come from specifically, well, not that I come from, but that I spent most of my time in. Um, Also, Halloween is not observed, but everybody at least knew what it was.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I didn't
maybe
know what
not
it was until I was in school,
yeah,
and then there were things like, oh yeah, we're going trick or treating. Please explain what trick or treating is. Or
right.
maybe I'll borrow a book from
Yeah,
the library.
I did have some very religious friends that was the case, but that's an interesting one. So that must have been a little bit strange for you at a certain point. And this actually kind of leads us very nicely into the next question, which is if you started out there, did you go to religious school?
I did. The first school I went to was an Episcopal day school, and I went there until I was partway through preschool.
Okay.
Partway through preschool, the powers there decide, or my parents, one way or the other, there was tension because I questioned things like the Easter Bunny mascot that visited us in a classroom one day. And I was willful and all these other things. So I went to a private Christian school from halfway through kindergarten through ninth grade. Um, and it was a very small school. It was there was no money, and they kept doing like tuition things to help people who couldn't go to. Um, I don't know how the other schools of my age compared, but couldn't go to the school their parents wanted to them anyway.
Just,
Um,
just a second.
so yeah, by the time I was in ninth grade, it just closed due to lack of funding.
Okay. Can you clarify one thing for me, for people who don't come from Christian communities, just before we
Yeah,
keep going? What is an Episcopal school?
cool. Episcopal is, I think, technically a Protestant religion. So Christianity is broadly, there's a God in the sky. He's probably a guy, probably. Um, Things happened the way that the Israelites and the modern day Jews say that they did for most of history. And then Jesus came around. And then Jesus fulfilled lots of promises that God gave to humanity, including finding a way to make it so that uh, Christians can go to heaven and live imperfect lives in the meantime, since we are humans, um, broadly speaking. So that trundled along doing its thing with the Catholics for most of Christian history. Then Martin Luther had some ideas about maybe we shouldn't extort the peasants, and maybe we should make theological thinking and critical thinking a little bit of a broader skill. Catholics didn't like that very much. But the Reformation and the Protestant movement that came out of that now has, actually, I don't know, I think about 50% of Christians. Um, Anyone who isn't Catholic or Orthodox is Protestant, and then there's lots of subdivisions of that. One of those subdivisions is Episcopalian, which is a form of, I'm abbreviating so much history
That's
here.
okay. You're doing a really good job of giving a very succinct history of the Reformation. Good job.
Thanks. um, yeah, a form of Catholicism that keeps a lot of the ritualized worship, maybe a little bit more of a opportunity to have cool church buildings than a lot of other movements do. But it's got the sitting and the standing and a little bit more of a Latin and like formal prayers and all that sort of thing.
But it doesn't
Um,
recognize the authority of the Catholic Church.
I don't think so. I don't know. I think
Okay. Fair enough.
Episcopalian is the American version of Anglican,
Mm.
which was invented when one of the kings of England decided he wanted to marry and divorce more people. And so he stopped being Catholic.
It seems from the way you're talking about this also that there was some emphasis, at least in your house, if not in your school, on understanding kind of Christian history.
Yeah,
Would
yeah,
you
for
say
sure.
that that was normal because at a certain point you left that school, right?
Mhm.
And you went to public school?
Yes. Ninth grade, the school ran out of money. Here's a fun little tidbit. My dad has the biblical gift of prophecy, and he was like, "Hang on, this school is going to close." And he was thinking along those lines a little sooner than everyone else was, which was ultimately a good thing because I don't take change well.
Okay.
But all that aside, um, there was more emphasis of the history in the school. Actually, was there? No, that was mostly at home.
Okay.
Um, in school, there was things like Bible class, uh, recitation and memorization of biblical passages, um, chapel, as well as, 7 hours of other things, um, or however long it would be age appropriate wise. But there would have been like, this is science class. This is what God did when he made molecules. Um, Perhaps not that heavy handed, but like evolution was very skeptically taught, shall we say. But yeah, most of the in-depth history came from home, and I think we engaged with theology perhaps not more deeply, but certainly more regularly than most of my peers.
Okay. I want to get back to this thing about you knowing some Christian history in a second, but before we jump, you just brought something up that's very interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
you were in there all the way up through ninth grade. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of time, relatively
Yes,
speaking. And you're saying that theology was kind of leaking across the borders into secular subjects?
for sure. It was a
Did
private
this,
Christian school, and
right,
in addition to the students who went there, the school also worked with local homeschooling families. So when
mhm,
there were tests that needed to be taken,
right,
um, or someone needed space for a day for something, or there was like a field trip or a field day, some sort of big organized event, then homeschool kids would come in as well.
okay,
And it was friendly because that was like two groups, a private Christian school and homeschooling families, trying to do similar things and like raise their kids in a very particular way. And
right,
that particular way includes talking about religion during non-religious subjects.
okay. Was that, do you feel like that interfered with your education?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Um, this is skipping ahead in the timeline. I don't know how chronologically we're going here, but
just
when I
that's
was
that's fair.
17, I moved to New York City.
Uh,
Uh, I went to a school up here, got a degree, been here ever since.
cool.
Um, but during the 4 years at an art school in New York City, I learned a lot of everything I know currently about um, any kind of political theory that isn't conservative, um,
Okay.
anything about critical race theory, anything about the history of racism in America. Uh, and that came out at certain points in my time at the school in ways that I deeply regret now. That's just part of growing up and learning about the world.
Yeah, it is. Although I think that it's worth noting to sort of put it another way, your education wasn't deficient in terms of sort of basic things, reading, writing, math, that kind of thing,
Oh, not at
but
all.
it had a political coloring that was very aggressive. Would we might say that?
Not aggressive.
Just censored, whatever.
Yeah,
I
molded.
do not want to put words in your mouth. Use whatever words you want.
Words particular
Hmm.
or molded. How about we go with curated?
Curated. Good. Nice. Spotify. Very nice. Okay, cool. So, rewinding a little bit,
Yeah.
Ninth grade, you moved to public school, right?
Yes.
You went out to public school. So there, once you left, again, how religious were your friends? Did you have friends from other faiths, other religions at all?
Let's see. Well, for starters, the private Christian school, in its biggest year, when I was in elementary school, I think, from preschool through 12th grade, we had 96 students. So yeah, by the time it closed, there had been a few desperate flings to increase population, shall we say, enrollment. Didn't work. So by the time I left, I had two like ex-friends because they actually went secular before I did, and
Hmm.
I wasn't ready to yet,
Okay.
frankly, and didn't. And so I was like, well, I have weird feelings about y'all, and I feel like we should keep talking, but also we shouldn't. I can't do that yet. So he then went into the public school, which was none too large. It's still the rural South, but it did have, was it 1,000 across 4 years? I think so. Yeah, I think it was orders of 10.
That's an order of magnitude larger. So yeah,
Yes,
that's
indeed.
still a pretty big change. I
Um,
mean, it's not unrelated, but do you feel
hmm,
like before I kind of sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
all good.
Do you feel like the fact that you went to a small school, because I think I'm being sort of uncontroversial when I say this, a lot of religious schools are small, and it doesn't matter what faith they're from. A lot of religious schools are by definition going to be smaller than public schools. Do you feel like that has shaped either your personality in any way or just how you dealt for a while? Was it very hard for you to adjust to dealing with this like very large peer group all of a sudden? Anything like that?
Yeah. Um, on the one hand, going to the larger public school did grant me a friend group. We weren't terribly close, but I like at least had people who I talked to daily, which was cool. Um, but then, yeah, being raised at that small Christian school, I now we're getting into something that's faintly controversial.
Okay.
Um, Unconfirmed, but my therapist, who I've been seeing for about 3 years, and I have begun to think that perhaps it's definitely, but legally and medically, perhaps I have ADHD and autism.
Okay.
And going to that small school with tiny, tiny classroom numbers was the best environment to raise someone like me in, as it turns out. Um, Case in point, I had a real hard time with going to the public school after that, and I was a grumpy so and so until I left for college.
Okay. So there were some there was a good aspect there. It was kind of a sheltered
Yeah,
environment, you know, and I really mean that in the best possible way because you're
yeah,
not the first person I've met who's gone to a religious school and that was part of the thing is that and then when they had to deal with larger environments, like all of a sudden they have to adapt to a much larger number of people at once
yeah.
and more noise and more stimulus and all that other stuff. So that's a good thing. Okay. So
I will add, I when I went to the public school,
yeah.
I was quickly limited in my friends. It was the weirdos. I was friends with the like two emo kids in all of South Carolina. There's more, but in
Well,
that
just
area,
to clarify, that was weird where you were.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Most of the
right.
people were country kids or
Okay.
black people desperately trying to use football to get somewhere better,
Okay.
or the popular moneyed, mostly professors' kids.
Okay.
Um, which is funny, but because most professors' kids do not have money. University has a lot of military and science ties, so there was some money floating around.
Okay. Okay.
Um, all that being said, I was quickly limited in my friend group to the weirdos because one, turns out I'm a weirdo, and two, I didn't watch the TV shows that everyone else did. I did
Hmm.
not listen to the music everyone else did. I had very few ways to make friends other than critically and intellectually engaging with them. Uh,
And that can
which
only get you
one
so far.
Yeah, that only gets you so far. It gets you to the really great people really quickly, but it also leads to a bit of a feeling of alienation when you can't or when you can't participate in the lighter chatter. Um, that still plagues me to the day, which is why it might just be a me problem. But there's certainly some help from growing up in a shall we say small environment.
Okay. So up until this point, up until public school, so we've talked about kind of everything. Up until now, we've started talking about your sort of entry into there. You were still believing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
I
You went
had
to,
there was a phase where I was like, how do we know that the Bible is true? Because there's lots of years and lots of translations in between, and that's where engaging with some more of the history of the faith came in. Um, but yeah, I was still like, this is, as far as I can tell, the best thing going. So I'll stick with this. Yeah.
okay. Out of curiosity, by the way, and then I want to talk about your time in public school, and we can kind of continue from there. Were you ever exposed to apologetics at all?
Oh, absolutely. Um, what is the man's name? How shall we then live? Heck, do you mind if I do a quick Google?
You can if you want. Yeah, sure. That's fine.
Uh, I I'm just gonna try for one thing. How shall we then live? Francis Schaeffer, God bless him.
I think I've heard of him. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we had so many of his books, and I read them. When did I read them? I think middle school.
Okay.
Yeah, had a real great time with them. Learned a lot of the history and a lot of the apologetic speaking points, because he has an excellent narrative style, and it makes it real easy to find tropes in his work, in a way that is helpful to someone who's looking for comfort, and a way that is helpful for someone who's coming along later and deconstructing their beliefs. Because then you can go, oh, that's exactly what Schaefer did when I read that book 4 years ago. Yeah.
So just to clarify, just so everybody kind of listening to this, if they've never heard the term apologetics, I'm going to give sort of my definition. You can agree with this or you can provide your own definition. Apologetics is where a person of a given faith, Christian, it doesn't matter, is being taught how to handle people who are not of their faith and have questions about the validity, the truth value validity of that faith.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
pretty good.
So you were already, in a way, being exposed to that. You were already being exposed to a way of dealing with people who are presumably either secular or from another faith who are like, but is that true?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're
Um,
already questioning the truth value of your faith. Okay.
yeah.
And this
Not
was this
least of
was pretty
all, I
young.
was
This was in middle school.
yeah, I was coming across, well, like, hang on, who said so?
Sure.
I was, a willful child in preschool, and then I, like went along with it, developed critical thinking in middle school, and went, hang on, who who died and made God God?
So you were already asking
God
some
exists.
questions that are that could be a little pointed, I think, in a religious environment, maybe.
Yeah. Mom was really good about it. She said this is a line of thinking that many Christians come across. Some of them engage with it their entire lives. That is what faith means. When this happens, if you want, we can talk to some deacons and elders in the church, or here's all the Francis Schaeffer's books, or every. We had a proper library. Our entire house was lined with bookshelves, so I had options for sure.
Cool.
Um, and like, you can pray. Those are the things that you can do. And if you decide not to go that way, I will be sad, and I will not continue talking about like what happens if you do not go if you do not continue to be a Christian. Yeah, but it was like there was a
You
hint of this is an option, but I don't think that you will take it, sort of thing.
okay? Well, this is an interesting one. Couple questions.
Yeah.
Let's start with the first one. What would you said your mom was good about it? Was
Hmm.
your father not good about it? Was your school not good about it? Were your friends not good about it? Was
Didn't have
anybody
any
not good about it?
friends.
Okay. Just came up.
So, um, school, I would not have brought this question to a teacher. That's not who I was at that age. I kind of wish I was. I wish I was more community engaged, I suppose, but also I was working with what I had. I'm not going to judge myself at
Sure, yeah.
age whatever. Um, and then lastly, why not my dad? I'm going to open up the door real quick, actually.
Go for it, please.
Everyone is gone. It's quiet. Now I can have circulation back. Um, my dad, I engaged with theologically over the dinner table. We would dissect the sermon that was given or talk about some of the messages in some of the songs because he was on the worship team. Um, he was with the band. Um, and yeah, that was the dinner topic there. It was less of a here's what I think about what this person had to say, and more what are the interpretations of this script as written by pastors over the years, basically. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
from what I've read, from what little I've read, our dinner tables sounded more like a yeshiva, like how Jews engage with their text,
Okay, yeah.
which I found very funny when I realized that one, not all Christians do this. What the heck, y'all? And two, you mean there is a religion where that's built in? Oh my God, what I would have been like if I was raised like that.
Oh yeah. Well, here's the deal with that one. Okay, and then we can just kind of. Oh, you know what? Maybe we'll talk about that afterwards. I want to talk about you. I don't want to talk about Judaism right now. We can talk about Judaism after. Okay, cool. So the other question I have is you mentioned that your mom had this kind of blank space out there of if you stop being Christian. Um, was there ever any direct discussion of that, what would happen, or it was really just left amorphous?
um, it was left amorphous. A lot was left unsaid for the most part in my family for all that we had these discussions. But it was left unsaid because what would be said was regarded as unpleasant, and we do not talk about unpleasant things. Um, my brain has decided we're going to talk about Fiddler on the Roof now. Fiddler on the Roof, one of the daughters marries outside of the Jewish faith, and the dad is like, well, I can't engage with you anymore. You are dead to me. Bit rough, but that was theologically sound according to that man, and that's where Tevye has to start engaging with human emotion versus what some humans have decided the spiritually correct thing is to do. What is spiritually correct? Is it loving people or is it agreeing with some nice written words? Um, I got Fiddler on the Roof facts. There are so many interpretations with so many different endings. Anyway,
We can see you've been spending some time in Brooklyn.
that
Yeah.
one came. I think we talked about Fiddler on the Roof in one of my classes, and then I
Okay.
read an essay about all these different interpretations of Fiddler on the Roof. Anywho's, how did that was a rabbit trail and a half.
That's no, that's okay. That's fine.
Oh, so did mom explicitly say if you stop going to church and stop calling yourself a Christian, then I think you're going to hell and we're going to have limited contact? No, but that's what happened.
Okay. Did any of the elders at your church, did any of the teachers at your school talk about what happens if somebody leaves the faith?
No.
No,
Um,
it's just not discussed.
it's not. The only phasing into or out of faith that was talked about was bringing more people in. Um, very apologetics, very recruitment. Um,
And this was from what age that you were being told to do that?
Uh, day one, probably.
Day one,
As,
hour zero, preschool?
as soon as we were talking about Christianity, it was also, and you should let other people know about this and look
Okay,
to bring in more people to the faith when you
okay,
can.
okay, okay. All right. So now we've gotten all the way up to ninth grade. We're in high school. You mentioned that you started to have sort of some emo friends a little bit and some weirdo friends, and you started
Yeah.
to kind of be like, hey, maybe this is where I'm at. This is where my identity's at. Your identity's starting to shift. Normal process for a teenager, I think.
Yes.
Okay. You didn't explicitly answer this. Did you have any friends who weren't Christian at that point?
Hmm. By then, yes. My friend group, probably none of them would have identified as Christian. A couple of them would have, ironically, identified as Satanists.
Hmm.
These days, I'm probably the closest thing to a Satanist, although I am not. But
When you say a
um,
Satanist here, just can you clarify a little bit? I'm a little bit familiar with Satanism. Do you mean kind
yeah.
of Lamarckian Satanism, or do you mean like animal sacrifice Satanism?
So in high school, my friends would have ironically identified as the animal sacrifice Satanism.
Okay.
Edgelords, you know. But yeah, these days I got beef with that with formal Satanism. But yeah, the same principles of, on the one hand, Satan is a social symbol. Let's use that. And on the other hand, but like we gotta act with love, y'all. Those are the two modern forms of Satanism that I draw from. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might pay to just explain a little bit further here, because to any person listening to this, they're gonna go, Satanism, oh, like worshiping Lucifer. Maybe elaborate a little bit from your perspective.
Yeah. Um, someone has just re-entered the house, so I apologize if there's noise.
That's okay.
Um, see, I don't know so much about the history of Satanism.
You don't have to talk about the history. Just give me a definition from where you're at.
Okay. Personal working definition of Satanism. Um, Satan is a social symbol. Because America in particular is founded with Christianity so baked in, Satan can be used as a symbol of opposition to uncritical following. It can be used as an oppositional symbol to the norm, to patriarchy, to misogyny, to racism, all these other things. Um, Mostly, it's used by white people with an edgy background.
Okay. So is Satan in your version of Satanism? Again, this is just your perspective. I don't need a formal definition. This is where you're at. Is Satan an actual deity?
I think Satan is an actual deity,
Okay.
and I do not necessarily respect him. We're coworkers.
Okay, nice. Okay, legitimate. Very legitimate. Okay. So your friends were mainly not your version of Satanism, the other version of Satanism, or
Right,
another
the
version of
80s
Satanism.
panic, etc.
Yeah.
version.
What happened when you sort of started hanging out with them? Was there any kind of, I'm a Christian, what about Lucifer? Let's talk about Lucifer. What happened there?
I probably did around that. I don't remember when, but at some point I got more interested in like revelations, and the more esoteric, non-literal versions of the Bible, the visions parts, um, as well as, well, hang on, is the lore of Lucifer actually written down in the Bible? No, it's from this other book, Paradise Law. It's from Dante's Inferno. Where did all of this? Who made this canon? Hang on. Um, so did that have an immediate impact? No, but it definitely showed up like 4 or 5 years later when it finally got through my noggin of, we're just all doing what Milton said. Hang on, what happened to what Jesus and God said?
Okay. So wait, would you describe, we're kind of jumping ahead. I usually ask this later, but would you describe, again, your perspective on it, not everybody else's? Would you describe it as a religion, or would you describe it as something else?
Which? Satanism?
Satanism. Yeah.
Ooh, for me, it's a guiding philosophy.
Okay.
For most people who call themselves Satanists, it's a guiding philosophy. Um, some people will use it as a religion, Anton LaVey, etc. Um, in like once you get down to how they actually apply it, it's a religion. But that's a highly personal thing as well.
I
Is
think I said
Christianity a
Lamarck. I
religion?
think I may have accidentally said Lamarckian Satanism as in Lamarckian evolution. I meant LaVey. Okay. So it's a philosophy. How would you distinguish that from a religion?
I don't think I actually have time or energy to engage with that
That's
question right
totally
now.
fine. That's totally fine. But you would say that there is some kind of a divide between maybe the level of like what it dictates, how much it dictates what you need to do.
Mm. Mm.
That might be sort of how to do it, because I think that that might be an easy way to sort of very easily distinguish between religion and a philosophy. A philosophy has some principles attached. Religion has a lot of ritual attached in most people's heads, I think. I
Yes.
am generalizing very, very, very broadly.
That is clarifying, though. I think I agree that, yeah, philosophy might actually have more day to day application, especially behavior wise. And then religion, at least in the society I'm working in, tends to be you do this and that at this place at that time.
Mhm.
Um, Also, there's philosophy.
Okay. So we mentioned already that you had started coming into contact with people who were no longer identifying as Christian,
Mhm.
and that had a sort of that had an impact on you that you think kind of stretched out over time.
Yeah.
Was there a tipping point, a point where you knew that you were no longer going to have Christianity or religion in the sense that we just talked about guide your decision making?
Yes. It faded and faded through high school and college. I still went to church in New York City in college through, I want to
You went
say
to church
junior.
while you were in art school?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um, I wasn't the only one, but there were like five of us.
Hmm. Now you're the edgy kid. Yeah.
Yeah, always, man. Oops. No. I went to church through, I think, junior year. Um, I was also working. Granted, I've been working since I was 12, so that wasn't anything terribly new, but that on top of exams at a college level, one of which was a ceramics course, and like timing was an important factor. Between all of that, church got dropped. I dropped church. Felt incredibly guilty and ashamed about that for a long, long time.
Why?
And because I still thought that it was the right thing to do and that I should be doing that,
Hmm.
that I should be going to church and um, in community and formally engaging with scripture. Um, but the tipping point on that came in senior year when I took a class on conspiracy theory. And as I learned the underpinnings of how conspiracy theorists think and how they construct arguments and this, that, and the other, I looked at everything I'd ever heard Ken Ham say and I went, hold the phone.
Okay.
You mean to say that this isn't logic? Shit. Shit, 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 shit. The world is actually not 6,000 years old. Okay. And from there, I fell out of Christianity on my ass.
Okay. So would you say that was also when I one thing that I want to kind of clarify here, because you mentioned that you believe in Satanism, and this is a talk about secularism as an idea.
Yes.
Okay. Which in this case, the working definition we're going to use for secularism is that you're not using religion to guide your decision making. That is what you would say you're a secular Satanist.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I normally, again, I'm probably gonna ask you that question again later. It's like, how do you describe yourself theologically?
All good.
Let's leave that alone. So junior year of college, it just kind of you feel like it was sort of like this thing built up and then the dam broke.
Yeah. All these reasons that I socially no longer worked with Christianity,
Hmm.
um, and in many ways never really had, but that's a different topic. That has to do with neurotypicality and gender and all these other things. Yeah, that all built up in junior year. Senior year, took the conspiracy theory class, damn broke.
Okay. Well, we can talk about what you just mentioned because I think that looking at this thing that you socially were already before in your own mind the ideology had dissolved to some extent.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
already were socially not acting Christian,
yeah,
right?
in
So
many ways.
yeah,
I didn't do a huge version, a huge part of American Christianity and Southern Christianity is purity, so not having sex before marriage, and that one stuck with me until I was 21. So
was that something that caused you any? Was there sort of an emotional tinge to that one way or another?
there was building up, and then once I made the decision that I that that I no longer needed to use that as a tool to make a decision for me. Um, After that, then yeah, no more. Mm, no, no more guilt or shame or anything like that.
So that kind of also it seems like it sort of built up and then kind of broke.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
Sinkhole is a really good way to
A
use your
sinkhole.
language in application. Yeah, it dissolved
Sure.
and it dissolved, and then there went the
Right.
top.
And then all of a sudden it goes on. Okay. Okay. You did mention something about it sounded to me like, okay, identity, gender identity specifically, okay, and sexuality.
Mhm.
Can you talk if you're comfortable? You do not have to talk about this. We can move on if you want to, obviously
I
like
brought it
any other
up.
question. Yeah, I know, but that doesn't mean that you want to talk about it.
Fair enough.
Can you kind of describe the arc there? Okay, from sort of where you started to where you are now, I guess.
Yeah. Um, in middle school, I don't think I had that great a grasp on um, sexuality in as much that I knew that humans procreated, um, but I had no idea why they'd want to. Didn't sound
Hmm.
that appealing.
Hmm.
What's up with that? Um, I realize now that all the other queer kids at that school, and there were some,
When you say that school, you mean the Christian school?
yes, at the
Okay.
private Christian school, all of them knew me and were like, something different about that one. I did not pick up on that and did not realize that until years later. Um, so I knew that sex was a thing. I almost knew that gay people existed. Um, and then probably in college, maybe an inkling, like jokes and incomplete understanding of what trans people were in high school. But yeah, and gender nonconforming stuff that like started in high school and understanding. And then in college, I was like, well, hang on, I could be those things. Whoa.
So
um,
there wasn't any exposure, direct exposure to these ideas. Not ideas. These are things. These are things in the real world. They're not ideas.
yeah,
There was no direct exposure to any of that until college.
not really, no. I might have read books with characters who were not cis het, not cisgendered or heterosexual. Um, but nothing springs to mind. And yeah, I came out to my mom as pan in, well, somewhere either, no, somewhat, sometime after college. Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago, actually. Yeah.
So that was after you had already left Christianity in your own mind.
Yes. So, senior year of college, when I was 20 or 21, I told my mom that I was not attending church anymore. And then she was like, Christian? And I was like, no. And that made her very sad, which made me very sad. But that's how it goes. After college, when I was probably 24, 25, I told her I was pansexual. Um, And then, oh yeah, I was terrified to tell my dad. Didn't tell him until I was almost on the bus to go back to New York City. And then told them that I was trans June of 2020. And we have not been in steady communication since. Trans, I didn't, it sounds silly to an outsider, but I was gender nonconforming and using a different name for 2 or 3 years. And then I read a book by Janet Mock and was like, I could get hormones. What? Which is a thing that I already knew. And like people in I'm not directly friends with anyone who medically transitioned. I'm just now becoming friends with some people who are. But the idea of like, you could use the medication that you know about yourself. It's for you. That didn't connect until January of 2020. And then in May, I was like, I'm gonna do it.
Okay. So from a timeline standpoint, also, you came out to your parents, to your mother. You didn't say your dad. Did that happen at the same time as not Christian anymore, basically?
A couple of years between there. So not Christian told mom, not
Yeah.
dad.
Okay. Did your mom inform your father, or was that kept siloed?
Yeah, mom told dad. I knew she would. It's unfortunate that we don't talk because they're a really good couple. They, from what I can tell, work together really well. And yeah, I made her sad by telling her that I was no longer a Christian, and I knew that she would go to dad for comfort and to let him know.
Right.
I did not know that when I came out as pan. I figured she might not tell him because that's pretty heavy from her point of view. And so I was terrified and did not tell dad until I was on the bus to go back to New York. And then, yeah, he went home and evidently they were sad together.
So it seems to me, this is just from what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
It seems to me like the emotional charge, the emotional weight, the emotional tension, whatever you want to call it, was in terms of, I'm going to talk about it from least to most tense, was theological, sexual orientation, and then gender identity, sexual identity.
Hmm.
Yes?
In terms of emotional weight, the most weighty is trans and
Mhm.
gender identity. That's the one that, yeah, we no longer speak regularly. If you ask them, they will say that they love me. I love them, but what I am does not exist in their world. So that's the heaviest one. After that, the next heaviest is no longer being a Christian. And then the least heavy would be sexual orientation.
Okay, so from a tension standpoint, it's actually, again, least to most, orientation, theology, identity. Okay. Do you feel like because you had popped the cap off of the theology thing first, that kind of you already had done this huge thing, you could just kind of do the others? Was
It
that
made
kind
it
of part of
easier.
it? Okay.
It made the sexual orientation one a lot easier. Um, when I first to myself realized I was trans, I assumed I would never tell my parents. Um, and I assumed that would be fairly easy because I didn't go on hormones immediately. When I went on hormones, I was like, I gotta tell them because otherwise I'm gonna show up with a lower voice and a different body build. And if they ever meet any of my friends, they're gonna be very confused. My friends will be because they'll be talking about a woman who hasn't existed arguably ever, but who definitely doesn't exist right now and hasn't in many years. So I had to tell him at that point.
Okay. I'm conscious of your time. I can see that it's about 10 o'clock New York time now, right? And you need to leave at 10:30? Okay, so I want to kind of go fast through the rest of these and then we'll call it time, okay?
Cool.
So
if we need to do this again, that's cool too.
No, it's totally fine. So, real fast, okay? Why do you think that is the big deal? Because to me, approaching this from the outside, as somebody who's familiar with Christianity from an outsider's perspective, who's familiar with I'm familiar intellectually with the idea of transness. I'm familiar intellectually with the idea of, having some kind of gender non-conforming identity. I understand what gender is. I understand what sexuality is. Why would that be a bigger deal than the future of your immortal soul? Because as far as I understand it, if you are a Christian and you're an apostate, you're going to hell.
Yep.
So why is that in your mind? Why do you think this was a bigger deal for your folks than the other stuff?
I can only answer as someone who is not my folks. I will also add that many Christians support trans people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we're not generalizing to all Christians here.
Yeah. Why I think this was such a particularly large deal for them. When I said I was no longer a Christian, Mom maintained hope that I would return. And me coming out as trans made it clear to her that I would not be returning.
Was the nail in the coffin. Okay.
Killed the hope. Yep. For Dad, I don't know what he hoped or thought, but I know that he's been going very, very conservative and very right-wing these days. And the further right-wing he goes, the more bad things he reads about trans people and the more gender-critical things he engages with. So, yeah, he thinks that trans people don't exist and this is a fad. It's a very expensive fad. That's a different conversation. And he thinks that going against the body that God has given me is tantamount to building the Tower of Babel. That's a joke, but it's a best one I can come up with right now.
Okay, meaning it seems blasphemous.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you came out first as well. Let me ask you a question. When that happened in junior year, when you had this break mentally and you understood, like, I don't believe this anymore, did you immediately come out to all of your friends? Did you immediately just kind of just be like, yo, I don't believe in this anymore. You guys want to do something on Sunday morning? Like, did something happen like that?
No. I didn't have much in the way of friends in college either.
Okay.
But Sunday morning then just became another opportunity for me to work or study or do whatever. Or sleep. Not much of that, mostly the prior to.
Sure.
Did I let anyone know? I don't think so. Nothing comes to mind.
Okay. Did you feel like you had resources? Like, did you look for resources? You're like, okay, I don't have faith anymore. Was there kind of a gap in your routine, in your mind, that you felt like you needed to kind of occupy with something else? Or I don't know what to do now. There is a phenomenon, just as an example, that I've heard from former Catholics, which is that they leave the faith, but they're still worried about hell. And then so they end up like going and seeking out some counseling about that or something. Was there anything along those lines? Did you feel like you had resources?
No. Didn't have resources. I was raised not asking for help, rugged individualism. Why stop that then?
Sure.
I did do a lot of Googling, and tried to find a blog or few that had someone that wasn't a Christian anymore, but was still theologically interacting. Nothing stuck at that time. now I have found a part of YouTube that engages with critically thinking about Christian fundamentalism and evangelicals.
Yep.
And that has been a lot of really lovely guidance and deconstruction that I, again, probably could have used back then. I don't know if I would have been ready for it. I had a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a big online space of like all kinds of free thinking about that stuff for
Yeah,
sure. Is this
I
something?
highly
Oh,
recommend the YouTube part of it, but that's just
yeah,
also how I engage.
sure. Okay, so that is one of the questions I almost always ask is if somebody was thinking about leaving Christianity or had questions, what you would recommend just YouTube, what would they search? Are there specific things they should look at?
Uh, Deconstruction or deconstructionism
Hmm.
paired with keyword Christianity.
Okay.
Um, in those spaces, there's a lot of high emotion. In someone who's going through deconstruction, there's a lot of high emotion. So
Sure.
one of the things to bring into that is grace, uh, which I didn't get a lot of opportunity to use growing up, actually. So it was really cool to still have something that I was raised with as a value
What do you mean
then
by
be
grace?
useful. Um, Going into an engagement with someone, assuming that they don't mean ill, um,
Sure. Yeah.
that they're working their best with whatever tools they have. And if that means that they're going to yell at you and call you dirty names, then you don't have to work with them anymore. You can block them, be sad, and then get back on and engage with someone else instead of
Sure.
trying to figure out if you can help them or if something's wrong with you or
Sure.
just like
Okay.
that's just not where you're needed. And then going on and someone else will have to extend grace to you because none of us are perfect and we're all trying to learn and grow.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Um,
you're completely out to your family with all of the consequences that that has had. You're out to
yeah.
your friends now, I assume, about all of those things.
Yes.
Okay. Your sexuality, your identity, theologically, everything.
Yes.
Okay.
Some of them also know that where I did find guidance, I'll add to this as well, was indirectly, but the non-specific support that can be offered in um, unaligned spiritual spaces. So occultism bookstores,
Hmm.
Buddhist
Okay.
temples, uh, very unspecified meditation tracks on YouTube. Like those things are all lovely as well, and they helped.
Spiritual, but not religious. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Now that you are secular,
Mhm.
what do you feel like has changed about your life? What's sort of the biggest thing that's different now?
It's something that is continuing to change. And I don't know how much was strictly the religion, although I suspect a significant, good hearty portion of it was.
Sure.
Um, Looking at the world with grace and with love rather than with fear.
Hmm.
Um, Assuming that I'm going to need to defend something or that someone's trying to take something from me. Turns out we're all just trying to live on this weird rock together.
So you feel less adversarial, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a big change.
Yeah.
That's a big change. Okay. As a member, well, former member of, I guess you could say the Christian community, what do you think is the best and worst advice you've received about coming out as secular, if you've received any at all?
Seeing as how I didn't ask for guidance from anybody at any points, I did not get any advice.
Okay. That's fine.
That being said, the non-specific support that can be offered by Christian comedy blogs, Christian comedy writers,
Okay.
um, spiritual but not religious groups,
So
etc.
those are the things you would advise somebody to seek out if they were questioning, kind of, or if they had already left and they were like, let's say, not out yet about it, something like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I see. Okay.
In an indirect way, what I'm saying is the best advice I have is to find community in some way.
Right. Don't try to go it alone.
You could help it, yeah.
Okay.
Even if that's Reddit or lurking on a blog,
Sure.
there are other people, and that's a really good thing to know.
Sure. Okay. I already asked you to kind of describe your stance on religion now.
Hmm.
What is it sort of on as we say in Hebrew, on one leg.
Yeah, I'll stick to the earlier answer of a philosophy or philosophy group that has ritual components, gathering, actions, singing, and which, when used best as a social tool, also betters or at least engages with the community
Okay. And
outside of that.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. I want to call it time because I want to make sure you have ready time to ready. You have ready to get time. You have time to
Yes.
get ready. So I'm going to close the recording.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to participate in the Secular Stories project, feel free to reach out via the email in the description below or through Facebook at Modern Contemplations. Participation can be completely anonymous and your identity can be protected. Thanks. Bye.